I want to say this to the Prime Minister. It is time for the Prime Minister to take a serious look at the people who are around her. In the 80-something days that are left between now and the federal election, the Prime Minister needs to be the real Julia. Now, we heard about the real Julia after the fake Julia was around in 2010 and in that election campaign. But which is the real Julia Gillard? Is the real Julia Gillard the person who stood up at the Women for Gillard event, blasting away about abortion and how women are going to be torn away from the heart of Australian politics if Tony Abbott becomes Prime Minister? Or are we going to have a scenario where perhaps the real Julia Gillard is the one who likes knitting? Now, I don't think probably the real Julia Gillard is either of those people, but she has become this figure largely because of the advice of the people that are around her, chiefly a bloke called John McTernan. Now, you know that I don't like this man, and I don't like this man because of everything that he has done professionally in this country and what he has done to political debate. He almost single-handedly has become emblematic of how nasty politics has been played in this country at the moment, how journalists are being intimidated, or at least attempting to be intimidated, and he, as the chief spin doctor for the Prime Minister, seems to truly believe that the media's job is simply there to serve the government, rather than a fundamental understanding that it is government that is supposed to serve its people, and its representatives quite often are the media. But a perfect example of the advice that he is giving to the Prime Minister that is 1,000% wrong is what has happened after I showed you that front page of the Daily Telegraph last night. Once again, we've all seen this photo. Now, this is an innocuous photo. It's a weird photo, but it should have been nothing more than that. It should have just simply been a weird photo that you have a little giggle at and we all move on. But General Patton, he decides to turn this into a full-blown fight with the Women's Weekly. Who suggested the knitting? Who suggested that it was going to be a knitted kangaroo? Who asked the questions? Were they going to appear inside the article? Were we guaranteed the front page or not? Why is any of this garbage being played out in public? And why is it being played out by people who surely have bigger fish to fry than who is responsible for a photo of the Prime Minister for the Australian Women's Weekly? And even before we get into the murky mess about who said what, and believe me, tomorrow the newspapers will make it very clear what the Prime Minister's office knew and didn't know before they went anywhere near that photo shoot, let alone the interview, let alone the printed magazine, let alone what's happened in the past 24 hours. Talk about confected outrage. But fair dinkum, this bloke decides to pick a fight with the Women's Weekly. The Women's Weekly, who basically did a straight up and down profile, and the knitting thing has been a little interesting to their readers for some time. Remember a couple of years ago when we first started to hear about the knitting scenario with Julia Gillard, they were inundated with people who wanted to get, literally, the pattern inside the magazine. We know that she's knitted booties for famous people like Fifi Box, and she's knitted them for her friends like Penny Wong. OK, great. The lady likes to knit. But Julia Gillard is the one who ultimately sat down in front of a camera, decided that a pose that was acceptable to her, an image that she was fine to put out into the public, was her holding the giant knitting needles with her dog at her feet, some sort of a cross between, I don't know, the lady next door, a nice auntie, a retiring Governor-General. I don't know what the message was, but it clearly wasn't a prime ministerial look. But it was Julia Gillard who decided to do what she did in that photo. The suggestion from the Prime Minister's office that somehow they have been pantsed by the Women's Weekly is ridiculous. Helen McCabe, who'll be my guest here tomorrow night, yes, she's a powerful woman, but do you think that she is powerful enough to intimidate the Prime Minister of this country? A woman who has been able to kill off Kevin Rudd 4 times. A woman who has been able to hold a ridiculous government and a dysfunctional parliament together for 3 years. You think that the thing that's going to bring Julia Gillard undone is a photo of her in the Women's Weekly with a couple of knitting needles. Prime Minister, you have a problem. His name is John McTernan. And anyone in your office who thought fighting with the Women's Weekly was a good idea. This bloke is treating your campaign just like another gig. But for those of us that actually pay his wage, this is our country. This is our debate. And honestly, could the Prime Minister's office pick some better fights than just with the Australian Women's Weekly? Please. And by the way, before John McTiernan decides to ring the boss of this television station like he often does, or tries to go backdoor via David Spears or somebody else down in the Canberra office, or maybe like somebody tried to do today, trying to ring through to the Switch and eventually get a producer to complain about something on this show, here's what you can do. Send me an email. It is pmurray@skynews.com.au. That's my private email. And if it's you, I'll tell you what my mobile number is. Don't talk to other people, speak to me directly. But if the Prime Minister is watching us, or advisors who actually have any idea, in the real world, people get sacked based off poor performance. Under this bloke's reign, there are fights with the media all over the place. The Women's Weekly is the most recent. And this Prime Minister has a primary vote of 29% and a disapproval rate of 60%. I would have thought that that has a lot to do with the bloke who's in charge of getting the Prime Minister out there among the people via the media.